Okay, so today we're taking a look at watercolor, and this is our practice sheet. And everyone should have 2 of these in their kit, so please take some time, practice with the watercolor. It's going to be a lot better if you take your time and practice first before you move on to your good copy so that you kind of understand how to use the material. Everyone is going to set up their workspace the same way that I have. You want to have your watercolor palette out, you want to have a cup of water, something that has a decent amount of water in it. You're going to have your brush that comes in your kit and a paper towel, also a pencil, and we have our tiny piece of watercolor paper. So we're going to just draw a few random shapes on our paper. Really cover the paper. Notice, this is incredibly important. When I draw with pencil on watercolor paper, and if I plan on using watercolor, it is so important that you keep your pencil light. I'm gonna draw a shape here that has a darker pencil, and you're gonna see why. The graphite is gonna smudge into the watercolor. It looks really yucky. All right, so I'm just gonna fill my paper with some shapes. They don't have to be any particular shapes. You can do anything you want. I just want to kind of fill in my paper so that I have plenty of places to practice my watercolor. Okay, so now I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to dip it in the water. There's a few different ways that you can apply watercolor, but I'm going to show you some of the more basic ways. Also, personally, on a personal level, as an artist and as you learn to take any art classes, I never ever use my black unless it's something that is specifically black. I will never use that black. It's way too dark. It's going to muddy up all of your colors. So really be mindful about not using the black unless you absolutely need to. Okay, so I'm going to apply some water to my brush. What I can do, I can dip directly into the pigment, into the paint, and paint, and I get a really saturated color. And it's interesting to see how the paint forms on the paper. So you can see I'm starting to run out of pigment. I have 2 options here. I can come back in and add some water to my brush, and I can pull from the pigment that I have on the paper. So you'll hear me say pigment when I talk about the watercolor. It's the color, it's the paint. Okay. So notice I get a little bit of a blotchiness when I watercolor this way, which might work depending on what you're doing. But I have one that's kind of heavy, right? Okay, the next option is to get a good amount of water on my brush and add some pigment to my palette. Then continue to add water to my palette so that I'm creating a little reservoir of the watercolor. And then take that over to my paper. And notice my color is definitely a lot less saturated, right? It's definitely a lot more muted, but it applies to the paper a lot easier. It goes on a lot smoother. I have less of those stroke marks. It's just a more even color. Okay, so one of the things that's really important about watercolor is if I plan on going over top of it with another color, unless I want those colors to merge together, I need to let my colors dry. So let's go on to one of our, notice my brush was not completely clean. See how my yellow is a little muddy? What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna mix 2 of my watercolor colors together to get a different pigment. We can go straight from the colors that we have, but one of the things that's so nice about paint in general is mixing your own colors so that you can get a variety. So I'm gonna mix up my green, come down here and fill in my green shape. Now, when I said about having our pencil being very light, here's why that's important. if I were to go over top of this one up here with this yellow, also you can easily clean out your watercolor so that you get all the yucky out by just adding some water. Okay. All right, so if I come up here and I go over top, see how it starts to pick up the graphite and it starts to muddy up my colors. You really want to make sure that you're keeping your pencil light. Okay, and then I'm going to try out some of these other colors. And then I might decide to come back in some of these areas that were more dry. If I wanted to, I could go over top and notice how watercolor blends so nicely. The more water I add, the more easily it blends. You want to be really mindful though, you don't want to oversaturate your paper just because it'll start to curl and it's more difficult to use. Okay, so I have this color up here. I could always come back in and add another color over top and change up the color. So now I'll start to get that red purple. I could come back in with the same pigment and then really darken up what I have because I let it set up and dry a little bit. I think one of the nicest things about watercolor though is keeping it opaque so I can see through. And you are going to just play around with your paper. Maybe mix the colors together, see what happens. If I mix my blue and my purple, what color do I get? And really take your time mixing some colors together because it's really interesting. I think we get stuck in this idea of working straight from the palette because it's what's given to you in front of you. But it's really important to learn to mix up the colors because you can get such a variety of color compared to what you're given with these specific colors in front of you. Okay, so you want to make sure that you take your time, understand how you can watercolor each of your shapes, and fill in each different space. Once you're finished, you are going to take a photo of this and upload it to the assignment page. Oh, so that what I just did right there where I added some green and I let it sit. What'll be really nice is when that dries, I'll have a really dark space where that green is. It'll be very intense in that specific place because I'm letting the pigment stay there. I'm not trying to pull it all around. All right, let me know if you have any questions.